Good morning, everyone. Today we study the portion of Vayikra, and we're starting from selections of from Lakutei Sichot, the second talk of the Rebbe. The Rebbe is going to concentrate on the idea of sacrifices. Today we do not have any sacrifices, and for many, many reasons. Also, sacrifices is not acting cruelty to animals, God forbid. It's a Torah law to be kind to animals, but the animals have to be slaughtered in a very humane way so they feel no pain before the procedure takes place. Different parts of the body are taken onto the altars. Sometimes parts of the animal can be cooked and be eaten by Kohanim, by priests, or by Israelite, but there is no animal cruelty. We don't burn a live animal, God forbid. Finally, the point the rabbi is going to talk, and it can get lost in the discussion going back and forth. The main theme is going to be about the reason for sacrifices. It's a question that's on everybody's mind. I've been asked continuously, what's the purpose? Why? Here, the book of Leviticus begins this week. We start the first portion. It is about sacrifices. We're going to discover the purpose for sacrifices. Number one, the phrase, a pleasing fragrance to God, is mentioned numerous times in connection with the sacrifices whose laws are discussed in this Torah reading. Right? A fragrance, aroma, a pleasing fragrance to God. Reach nichoach laHashem appears after every time God explains how to perform a particular sacrifice. So it appears many, many times. With regards to the first sacrifice mentioned in our Torah reading, a burnt offering of cattle, Rashi, so the first time the word Reach nichoach laHashem, a pleasing aroma to God. The first time Rashi stands on that, basing his comments on the common root shared by nichoach, translated as pleasing, and the expression nachas, ruach, meaning satisfaction or serenity, state reach nichoach, a aroma, a pleasing aroma that's very pleasing. Rashi says, pleasing, it is as if God is saying, this sacrifice brings me satisfaction that I spoke and my will was fulfilled. Rashi says, you know what pleasing aroma be to God, pleasing fragrance to God? It is a pleasing satisfaction that I derive from you obeying my command, following my instruction. I spoke and you follow. Similarly, in Parshas Tetzaveh, with regards to the sacrifices brought during the 7 days of dedication, earlier, about 6 portions, so 5 portions ago, where we read about the 7 days of dedication, where every day they brought different sacrifices, where it says, regarding the sacrifice of the rams, a pleasing fragrance, Rashi also comments, a pleasing fragrance, it brings me satisfaction that I spoke and my will was fulfilled. Says the Rebbe, so far so good? Huh? There are super commentaries who state that Rashi's intent is to prevent a reader from erring in thinking that the actual fragrance of the sacrifice brought serenity to God, for obviously that is not fitting to say about God. Therefore, Rashi explained that a pleasing fragrance referred to the satisfaction that God derives from having spoken and his will is being fulfilled. Some commentators say Rashi wants to tell us that there is no fragrance. The fragrance of the sacrifice brings pleasing satisfaction to God, because that's not the case. The pleasing satisfaction is that my words were said, I said, and you follow. However, their interpretation requires clarification. If one were to say that Rashi's intent is to negate the possibility of making such an error, that is, thinking that God derives serenity from the actual fragrance of the sacrifice. Rashi should have offered this interpretation, and the first time the expression a pleasing fragrance was mentioned regarding sacrifices, the sacrifices brought by Noah after the flood. At that time, Noah built an altar and sacrificed burnt offerings upon it. As the verse says, God smelled the pleasing fragrance. There, Rashi does not offer any interpretation at all. This is particularly problematic because that verse states God smelled the pleasing fragrance, and seemingly there would be a greater necessity to negate the anthropomorphic connotation that God derived serenity from the actual fragrance of the sacrifice. Says Rabbi, it doesn't make sense that that Rashi wants to negate the idea that God smelled the actual aroma that comes from the sacrifice, and that's what makes him pleasing, makes him satisfied. Why? Because there is a sacrifice that was brought way, way earlier, and it says there, Vayikra Hashem, God smelled the sacrifice, and he says this is a pleasing aroma. Over there, Rashi does not say, "Oh, the satisfaction is from my words being fulfilled." Rashi skips. So therefore, if Rashi wants to teach us that the satisfaction is God says and I follow, it should have been said. Rashi should have said it the first time sacrifice is brought.
Other version also brought sacrifices,
but it's not in the Torah. Here is Vayikra Hashem esreach hanichoach. God smelled the pleasing aroma, and God says, I will not wipe man anymore. In other words, God had satisfied at satisfaction from the reach, from the aroma of the sacrifice. If that's not what it meant, but it meant that Noah actually followed God's words, as commentaries say, that's what Rashi wants to teach us, then Rashi should have commented over there, not here, way earlier.
There is an analogy though to a human being. When you smell a good steak.
Right. Soon we'll find out. We'll find out about that.
Is it possible that Rashi didn't comment on it because the commandment wasn't there yet? When is the commandment to do?
That's possible. But it says that God had a satisfaction, a pleasing satisfaction from the aroma of the sacrifice. If Rashi here tells us that it's not about the physical aroma, but actual word that was said and you follow, then how do you explain over there by Noah when God smelled that? In other words, you can answer, that's a good answer, but then it contradicts the whole idea of Rashi. Then apply the same explanation here, that God actually smelled the steaks. And the Rebbe goes on to say that over there, it's not that Noah smelled the pleasing aroma, it is God. It says, Vayikra Hashem. Hashem smelled it by Noah. So it makes it even harder to explain that God had a pleasing aroma from sacrifice. Here is the Rebbe says that this, it is evident, I'm skipping the paragraph, I gave you the summary. It is evident that this interpretation is not sufficient for the following reason. A, if the primary emphasis of Rashi here is that the expression a pleasing fragrance to God is to negate the thought that God derived serenity from the fragrance of the sacrifice, it would have been appropriate for Rashi to cite these words in the heading of his commentary. However, Rashi merely cites the word nichoach, pleasing, and not the word reach, la Hashem, a fragrance to God. So on technicality, if you look at Rashi, Rashi interprets the word nichoach, pleasing. If Rashi is here to tell us that this pleasing was not about the fragrant, but about command being carried, it should have said Vayikra, God had smelled, meaning God had that pleasing from that, la Hashem. Number two, on the contrary, in Parshas Noach, the verse explicitly states God smelled. It says Vayikra Hashem, God smelled the pleasing fragrance, whose straightforward meaning is that the fragrance was pleasing to God as well. In Noah, it's clearly Vayikra Hashem. Hashem smelled it, smelled the fragrance. Not that God, his word is carried. See, in general, it is difficult to say that the expression a pleasing fragrance refers to the physical fragrance of the sacrifice, because as the commentaries to the verse here state, the fragrance of a sacrifice is unpleasant, for the meat is burned together with the bones. Not only it is not pleasing, but a personal soul is disgusted by it. If so, it cannot be said that the fragrance would be pleasing to Noah. Do you understand that, Leon?
Just because it burns.
It makes a very foul, disgusting. Sometimes the skin birds with the feathers. So but when you have a steak, it's cleaned up. Here we're talking about the leg, for example, or the hind side, or the head. The entire part with the skin and all inside is being burned. By the time, also, when you talk about steak, it is about marinated with oil and good spices. What happens if you put it under the grill forever until it becomes charged into ashes? The smell is no good. I am going to put a steak here in the oven to let it burn. The whole building will run away, right? So this is a technicality, says the Rebbe. It's impossible that God smelled the fragrance of the sacrifice, because the sacrifice has no fragrance. It is a foul odor that is repugnant. And therefore, it's impossible to say that that's reach nichoach laHashem. This is a pleasing aroma to God, the physical aroma. There is no aroma. Now, the Rebbe is going to try and explain what's the unique about sacrifices, that it makes reach nichoach, a pleasing aroma to God. Yes. Okay, good. If so, the original question returns, why did Rashi not interpret the phrase, a pleasing fragrance is referring to satisfaction in Parshat Noach? Says the Rebbe, let's go back. If pleasing aroma refers to my words are carried, which is absolutely necessary, it's impossible to say it's the aroma of the physical animal. Must be the pleasing satisfaction to God is my words are carried out. Then by Noah, same story happened, and yet Rashi skips. It says, "Vayorach Hashem et reach hanichoach," and it cannot mean to say the fragrance of the aroma of the actual meat. And therefore, Rashi over there should have stood and stopped by and says, "Oh, it's a pleasing aroma that you obey my commands."
There seems to be a contradiction here. In Noah, he wasn't told to bring anything, he brought of his own volition.
Right.
Here, God said, bring it.
So how do you explain by Noach, Vayorach Hashem et reach hanichoach?
I agree. I mean, I agree with the question.
So that's the question that Rabbi is asking. How come Rashi does not bother to explain it?
I'm surprised that Rashi didn't bother to
Let's-
explain what he did on his own volition.
Let's summarize. I just want to stick to the topic here. The sacrifices, every time God explains and gives us instructions, he says, Reach nichoach laHashem. The first time that appears, Rashi stands on the words Reach nichoach, a pleasing aroma, or a pleasing. And Rashi says, the pleasing aroma is the fact that my words are being carried out verbatim. Ask the Rebbe, what does that mean? That my words are carried. If it means that that's to negate that God does not derive pleasure from the actual sacrifices, from the aroma of the sacrifice, number one, I'm going to not go in order. Number one, it doesn't make sense that anybody derives pleasure from that aroma. So it's impossible to negate, don't need to negate that. Number two, Noah already brought a sacrifice. And over there it says, God smelled, Vayorach Hashem, God smelled the pleasing aroma, and he says, I will not curse man. Rashi does not explain there. Why is this that God was smelling? What God smelled? It was a complete burnt offering, olah. Nothing was off the altar. Olah, by the way, you take everything, the skin, the hair, the eyes, the nose, the teeth, everything has to be brought on, including the stomach. It's part of the stomach for sure. And yet, God smelled. it says Vayorach Hashem, not the Kohen, not the Noah. How is it possible? Here is the Rebbe. On this basis, it appears that Rashi's intent should be explained as follows. The Rebbe says, let's see what Rashi intended. By the way, you can't find it in Rashi. It's the Rebbe. But the Rebbe is in humility, puts it in Rashi's words. It is evident that the pleasing fragrance does not refer to the sensory satisfaction derived from the actual fragrance of the sacrifice. It's obvious, it's impossible. It doesn't smell good. Instead, his intent is to place the focus on the satisfaction and the pleasing God derives from the offering of the sacrifice. L'reach nichoach la'Hashem, a pleasing satisfaction to God is not about the actual sacrifice being burnt, because that does not emit any good aroma. It is about the actual man who brings the sacrifice, and we'll see how it works. Therefore, it is not necessary for Parshat Noach for Rashi to explain what satisfaction God derived from Noah's sacrifice. It is self-evident that when Noach left the ark after the flood, in which all flesh was destroyed, he experienced great satisfaction at being saved. This was why he offered sacrifices after the flood, to express his feeling of gratitude and satisfaction. As a result, as water reflects a face, so too Noach's expression of gratitude and recognition of God's graciousness aroused satisfaction above. God smelled the pleasing fragrance. That is, God found it pleasing. What the Rebbe says is Noah left the ark when he saw the entire universe was totally wiped out. There is no humanity. There is no animals. A deep feeling of gratitude and appreciation for God's saving him in the universe arose. And how does he express that? By slaughtering an animal and dedicating it to God. So he had a pleasing satisfaction feeling. And therefore it brought back, it's like a mirror. Life is like a mirror. When you smile at somebody, you smile back. If you love somebody, you love you back. So God in return smelled the pleasing aroma of Noah, and that arose a pleasing aroma by God. No, Ali would have asked a technical question here that would be difficult to explain. I know that. Yes?
How did Noach know to bring a sacrifice?
He learned it from Adam.
Okay.
Those days, serving an idol was through sacrifices.
Right. So what
Rashi, by the way, says that when God told them from kosher animals 7, he said to himself, why God asking for 7? It's because God expecting me to bring sacrifices so that they should not be extinct. Okay? So he knew based on that. He had the intuition that that's the purpose of the kosher animals, the doves, the cattle, whatever was kosher. Yes.
I'm just thinking that the fact that the sacrifice would be pungent, the smell would be pungent to man, we're thinking about it on our level.
Not on God's level.
Not at God's level. Could it be that the fact that because it's pungent and displeasing to us, and the fact that we make the sacrifice despite it being so pungent, that's what brings the satisfaction to God?
So my answer is that God created us in his image.
Okay.
So whatever is painful for us, whatever is repugnant for us, it's for God the same. You look at man and at reflection of God. Okay? And in addition, smell is the most spiritual sense. In Jewish law, you cannot sin with smell. All other senses, there are sins that can be committed. With eyes, the Torah in Shema, we say, it says that if you look in a place you're not supposed to, it's a sin. When you hear lashon hara, gossip, slander, when you taste not kosher food, when you hold something that's not yours, that don't belong to you, that's tamei, it's a sin. The only sense that is free of sin is smell. You cannot smell. In other words, there is a time you're not allowed to smell, A man is not allowed to smell the cologne of a woman, especially if she's married.
Mhm.
A man is not allowed to smell idol fragrance.
Okay.
But it cannot defile the sense of smell. Smell does not get defiled. It's the only one, meaning it's very spiritual. So if something is repugnant to me, it's for God too. It must be. So there is no good aroma from burning skin and feathers and innards of a stomach or the entire head. Okay.
Okay.
So says the Rebbe, very simply, by Noah, the reason that pushed him to bring a sacrifice is a deep gratitude for God's saving him.
Mhm.
Therefore, he was very pleased and he was very happy and expressed his happiness and joy and gratitude. And therefore, it arose a similar sense from God. And that's why God smelled the roach hanichoach. What is roach hanichoach? What is the pleasing aroma, pleasing satisfaction that God smelled? The pleasing satisfaction of Noah. And therefore he says, he smells the same, he feels the same, and therefore he's not going to destroy man forever. Over there, you don't need an explanation. However, all the other sacrifices, as they are mandatory, it's a whole different story. Now, when it says pleasing aroma to God, what do you mean pleasing aroma? What's pleasing aroma? And that's what Rashi wants to explain.
He brought seven of a kosher farm. We didn't sacrifice all of them.
We're not sure, because sometimes when you slaughter one, after you open up, you see it's not kosher, you have to bring another one.
He had thousands of kosher animals.
No thousands.
Hundreds?
Not that. I don't think so.
Must have been some slaughterhouse.
Ah,
Must have been some slaughterhouse. I mean, if you got all these kosher animals, he's not going to bring them all. He'll bring a couple of, ox or sheep. Or
you
goat.
bought one or two, right? So
Everything seven. Why seven?
why God told them 7? I can imagine why, but I don't have a source, so I don't.
Even number.
What is even number?
The
What do you even know? 7 is fine. 7, 2 times 2 is 14.
Oh, it's seven, each 7 male, 7 female. That's a lot of people, that's a lot of animals.
Right.
Nachmanides writes that the Ark of Noah was the first time a temple of God was created. That's why God bothers the exact measurements, and if you compare them to the tabernacle, you'll find very similar. In the tabernacle, there were 3 levels. There was Israelite, then there was Levi, then there was Kohanim, and the ark had 3 floors. He also says that he goes through how come God is giving him an instruction with the specific measurements? He says, if you go to Home Depot and ask them for a plan, or you go online, you Google or you YouTube a plan for a large housing boat that can house so much, and you follow the plans. God gives him the exact measurements it needs to be, because it's a temple of God. He also is bringing other proofs. In addition, he says that it's impossible to satisfy so many creatures in that small a structure. It's impossible, because they had to bring so many monkeys and so many different tigers and cheetahs and hyenas, and there are species that you don't even know about, that we're just discovering. How long ago the panda was discovered? Do we know for a panda forever? I don't think so. It's something that maybe 102 years old. No, Australia had an entire array of animals that we never knew about until people came to Australia. We know today in the Amazon there is many animals we don't even know that exist. That we keep discovering them all the time. All that had to be because there was nothing left on earth. Nobody can survive. It was hot water that melted everything. Therefore, says Nachmanides that the ark was a temple of God. Why did we get to it? I wanted to get to the present Torah reading, however, page 25, describes other types of sacrifices, explaining the mitzvot involved in bringing different offerings Here, when the verse emphasizes that these sacrifices generated satisfaction, clarification is required. How are these sacrifices different from all other mitzvot of the Torah, so that only with regards to them it's explicitly stated that they bring satisfaction to God? Rashi says the Rebbe had a problem. God says, Reach nichoach, a pleasing aroma. The question is, it cannot be the fragrant, it cannot be the aroma, the physical smell, because A, it's repugnant, right?
Right.
And therefore, says the Rebbe, there must be, Rashi had another problem. Suddenly God says, it's going to be a pleasing aroma for you follow my commands. Pleasing aroma should be also when you keep Shabbat, when you keep Yom Kippur, when you keep every mitzvah, you should bring a pleasing aroma. It is obvious that the satisfaction generated by the sacrifices is solely because through offering them, the person serves his creator. However, every mitzvah involved in the service of God. Why then it is not explicitly stated that the observance generates a pleasant fragrance or a similar expression denoting divine satisfaction? Rashi seeks to resolve this question through his interpretation of pleasing. It brings me satisfaction that I spoke and my will was fulfilled. The unique satisfaction generated by the offering of sacrifices is that it involves a singular approach to the mitzvah. I spoke and my will was fulfilled. Unlike that which characterizes other mitzvot, as will be explained. Says the Rebbe, when God says Reach nichoach after commanding every mitzvah, he wants to tell us this is the only time you can bring satisfaction to God because I have spoken and you followed. This is unique and does not exist with any other mitzvah, even though some mitzvot makes no sense and we do them as God said. We'll find out how. The resolution, let me give you a summary. Here's what the Rebbe says. Every time God gives us a commandment, it is for a purpose, to refine us. If you are keeping Shabbat, to remember God created the world in 6 days. It's called gratitude. When God gave us Yom Kippur, it is for atonement. When God gave us kosher laws, it is to know not everything is free and clear. You have to define before, remove the blood, make sure it's a kosher animal, etc. Every mitzvah God gave us is for the refinement of men. Then you have, and therefore, it's not my word is carried plainly, but it is my instruction to make you better is carried, and therefore you're doing it. Even the mitzvot who have no reason, the category of chukim, chok, is without a reason. There's a dispute whether they have a reason, but we don't know it. Ramban is of the opinion God does not reveal the reasons, but there are reasons for the red heifer. There is a reason for meat and milk. There is a reason for no drinking blood, no eating blood, shatnez. Thank you. There are many commandments that make no sense to us, but they do have a reason. That's Ramban. Rashi is of the opinion that they simply make no sense, but God has said so, and that's the reason. However, says the Rebbe, all the commandments, even if they have no reason, not only for us, for God it doesn't have a reason, the fact that we follow them makes us closer to God, brings us closer to God because I obey his commands. So therefore, God is satisfied that I am connecting with him. Sacrifices is a whole different ballgame. God said, there is no common sense for man, and there is no common sense to God. In fact, it defies knowledge. A sacrifice, what happened to a sacrifice, especially a burnt offering, most of them, the entire animals is being burnt, and there is no benefit. You spend $2,500 on a big ball, you bring it, just moving it. UPS does in Israel at the time of temple will do a livestock shipping too, and they will bring it to you to Yerushalayim. There has to be tested, there has to be checked, there are a few days. You cannot, for a week, you cannot work because you are with that ball. And then the day come, and about 24 priests are going to get involved in the slaughtering it, and the prayers and the confession, whatever you say, and then they carry it up to the altar. Two take one leg, two take another leg, one take the head. Each one takes one part, and they let it burn completely. And there is no, doesn't make sense. How about I take that money and I donate it to yeshiva so they study Torah? How about I improve the water cistern so poor people can have free, clean water in their home, filtered water? It makes sense. This does not make sense. Says God, the satisfaction is not to improve you like other mitzvot. It's not because I get pleasing for you obeying my command, the way I instructed you, like shatnez, but the satisfaction is simply I spoke and you follow. And in that way, it has to define all common sense. It has to have no reason. It has to be expensive. In other words, whatever logic holds, it has to go the opposite direction. And only then, reach nichoach. That's why it's a pleasing aroma, pleasing satisfaction to God, because it does not exist with any other mitzvah. Not only it doesn't exist with mitzvot for common sense, like stealing, no robbing, no carrying God's name in vain. Even the mitzvot that have no reason, like shatnez, still, either they do have a reason, but we don't know, or even if they don't have a reason, at least God benefits from it. Here there is no benefit, not to God, not to man, except I spoke. That's why Rashi used the word I spoke, not I commanded, I instructed, I spoke, meaning for a Jew, it doesn't matter what God is benefiting from it, except God said, and I follow. And that's the uniqueness of the category of sacrifices. That's why the Rebbe says, if you read about different categories of sacrifices, there is one sacrifice that the word reach nichoach, pleasing satisfaction before God, does not appear, and that is a sin offering. Sin offering, God skipped that word, that phrase. And the reason is, says the Rebbe, because a sin offering achieves atonement. All the other sacrifices are nedava, are a contribution or a burnt offering that is either obligatory but does not do any good, does not achieve any benefit for human. Sin offering exonerates you from punishment, clears your record, and therefore there is no pleasing aroma here, because it makes sense. Suddenly, God is giving you a pass through to cleanse yourself and open up and turn the page and start anew fresh from the beginning. And therefore, there is no reach nichoach. When does reach nichoach exist? When we read reach nichoach, a pleasing aroma, a satisfaction for God, only when there is no reason whatsoever, not for man, not for God, except God said so. I like to apply it to relationship, because I see people, this is very detached, because they have no sacrifices. When it comes to a marriage, those of us who are blessed to be married, in the relationship, sometimes one or spouse asks makes sense. Sometimes when the spouse asks something makes no sense to me, but makes sense to them. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to them either, but they just ask because they think that it might be potentially a benefit. That's all in the one category of chokim. Chok, according to Ramban, makes sense to the giver. According to Rashi, even the giver, the spouse, don't have reason. But then there is another type of instruction or command from a spouse, and that just wants to see the spouse follow. There is no benefit. It's just the satisfaction of my spouse close to me enough to follow my words. Does it benefit anybody? No. Does it make sense? No. Is it saving us? No. It's going to cost us more. It's going to take away time and energy. But just that, the bond is far greater. It's a display of relationship to a far greater, deeper degree. And that's why korbanot, sacrifice, is the only one where God says, reach nichoach, a pleasing satisfaction to God that does not apply to any other of the mitzvot. And that's a lesson this week. Be well, everybody.